All right, we are live. I don't know why I said it in that voice. Anyway, hello everyone. Is my audio coming through okay? Being?
Being here's it fine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just like I don't know, the thing, I don't know, the way the little circle like moves around your profile picture is weird. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, so hello everyone. We're going to be watching the latest Chomsky interview where he talks about anarchism. It's on Doug Lane's podcast, Zero Books, the Zero Books podcast. His Zero Books is his publication, and so it's his podcast. Um,
Yeah.
uh, and this doing this with me is my friend Post Comprehension.
Yep.
Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hello. I am being otherwise known as Post Comprehension, and I make YouTube videos about political philosophy with aesthetics. So there you go.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna get the video screen share thing up soon as my thing stops being frozen and playing ads. Okay. All right. So share
How
screen.
familiar with Zero Books are you?
Barely.
Okay.
Um, share audio. Chrome tab, Chomsky. Okay. All right. Yeah, I know about Doug Lane. I'm not a big fan of his, but yeah, that's it. I don't think I've really read many books from Zero Books. I don't think I've even read one.
I know they release stuff like Kill All Normies, or they'll release or they'll publish people. I think they published. Did they? Did it was either them or someone else published Mark Fisher's book. I think Zero Books
Yeah,
published.
they did publish Capitalist Realism.
Yeah, and then they published his other book, which
Hmm.
talks about like hauntology and stuff. So
Right. Ontology, like the oh,
hauntology.
what's hauntology?
Um,
Ontology.
to summarize like a really complex philosophical thing, it's basically the study of dead futures. So
Uh-huh.
Mark Fisher in Capitalist Realism talks about how capitalism has killed um, all the other possible like we used to envision a world beyond capitalism, but now that has died in service of like capitalist realism.
Right.
And in a book after capitalist realism, he expands on that, and this is taken from uh, Bastille, I think, is
Hmm.
philosophy, who talked about hauntology a little bit, and I know Mark
Right.
Fisher expands on it. So
Okay. All right. Can you see the video screen? The
yes,
video? Okay. Can you hear it?
yeah,
Okay. Epic.
get access to Ben Lane discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Doug Lane.
Very cool.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning.
Oh, also involved in this is going to be Michael Albert.
Yeah,
He's the guy who does parecon, participatory economics. Basically, it's like two economists, Robin Hannell and Michael Albert. I guess more so Michael Albert. Um, uh, Trying to develop a detailed uh, schematic for a libertarian
post-capitalism. Yeah.
socialist society.
And of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
We still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between.
What's with this like drawn out artsy ass intro?
So this person, I don't know who this person's name is, but they basically talk about a bifurcation and like they use the death of God as a metaphor
Zero
for like
is
a new
zero.
horizon of new ideas emerging.
Hello, Zero Books
So,
readers and viewers.
I don't know how
Yeah.
relevant it
We'll
is.
be exploring the idea of
Right.
parecon or participatory economics.
Oh God, can my thing
Noam
not
Chomsky,
freeze right now?
who's all the way to the right, is of course the most well-known left dissident in America, perhaps the world, and he is an academic giant in linguistics. Michael Albert is the former editor of Z Magazine and former publisher of South End Press. Albert's book No Bosses is coming
Okay,
out.
Michael Albert and fucking Gorbachev have the same fucking birthmark. The exact same fucking birthmark.
Similar, yeah. I remember when people did caricatures of Gorbachev, that was like the most common thing they would pick
Well,
out.
yeah,
for
the most
characters, yeah.
noticeable thing. Yeah.
And it serves as both a simple introduction to parecon and a polemic.
Political cartoonists aren't very savvy people. They kind of just like, oh, this person has a big nose. Let's draw a giant nose. Like,
so because racial stereotypes are in themselves caricatures,
yeah,
caricature cartoonists have the problem of accidentally, or maybe not
being
so accidentally,
very racist.
yeah.
Yes.
So when it came to Barack Obama's administration, there was
yeah,
So,
big
yeah.
ears, big lips.
Yeah, that was very common.
Yeah, I remember that.
Aimed at the left, arguing that we should think through real alternatives to capitalism. So, Noam Chomsky, Michael Albert, thanks for coming on again. We tried this once and it didn't quite work, so thank you for participating in this conversation.
Participating.
I wanted to start off by asking
participatory
Noam a
economics.
Noam, you've said a key element of anarchism, or really, I think you would say,
somebody is saying that
worthy
the
attitude
sound
about
balance
this
is
life,
off.
is that there should be an onus on arguing for vesting authority.
In what way?
They're saying that we are louder than the
oh yeah, that's
video.
probably chill. Just turn it up.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try that again. There should be an onus on arguing for vesting authority in some above others. In other words, if someone wants to claim authority, they should make a really compelling argument for taking that authority. Authority requires justification. I think that's a powerful norm. I would think it would imply right off that there should be no private ownership of workplaces, of resources. But I'm wondering what other kinds of implications do you think that social norm has?
Holds for everything from families to international affairs. The crucial element relevant here is Mike's point about no bosses. That is, any arrangement among individuals in which some give orders and some take them.
By the way,
Chomsky's about to talk about it. Oh, sorry. Chomsky's about to talk about his justified hierarchies thing in a minute.
Yeah, that's what Doug Lane asked about. And by the way, if you have anything to say throughout this, just tell me to pause.
Oh, okay, cool.
Has to have a very strong justification. Sometimes I think it can, like traffic rules. I think it makes sense to have people compelled by the community, by community decision, to obey traffic rules. That now extends to questions like vaccine mandates. Children going to school aren't allowed to school without a polio vaccine, measles vaccine. Should extend to COVID vaccines. I think that's a legitimate use of authority made. It should be made by a democratic vote of an informed participatory community. It's not the way it works here, but should work like that. But I think those would be especially under proper social conditions, legitimate exercises of authority. And I think you can find others. But for a community to function and survive.
Two things. You might want to do like 1.5x speed or something in regards to how slow Chomsky talks. And another thing, not to be like, but I'm just saying to kind of get it rolling along because it can take a while. Also, being an accelerationist, so you want to, kind of accelerate it,
Yeah,
Another
right.
thing, how do you feel about Chomsky's whole like justified hierarchies and in relation to say like traffic laws and stuff?
So he also uses the example of, well, a parent might exercise authority in that they pull their child out of traffic. I don't like that framing. I think what it does is um it takes the anarchist analysis out of uh social relations that allow for exploitation and domination, and focuses it more broadly on just these very trivial matters, like whether a parent should be able to pull their child out of traffic or not. Anarchists never argued that parents should not be able to pull their child out of traffic. Most anarchists don't argue that people should be able to spread disease, although you can certainly find some post-leftists who would go along with that. But so I think when he talks about this justified versus unjustified hierarchy thing, he's grouping relationships of domination in with very trivial matters of guidance and deference to expertise and collective action, and that is, as you will note, one of the main ways that relationships of domination are justified. Oh well, we need a
Right.
government because we need the state, because how else will we get people to get the vaccine, or how else will So I think the way that he frames it, justified hierarchy versus unjustified hierarchy, kind of replaces the anarchist conception of hierarchy and authority with a kind of liberal one that groups in relationships of domination with very banal, trivial matters of collective action, expertise, and guidance.
Yeah, it does seem as though Chomsky has a favorability to the social contract theory in some way, and a lot of what he talks about, how like unless you can justify it, well, every system of domination has some sort of justifier.
Yeah, right.
So liberalism has the Lockean social construct, fascism has its own version, monarchism has it, and it's not so much. It also presupposes that people will be rational enough in themselves to catch things and hold people accountable. Like it presupposes that people will be able to, and like I get it, you want to put the burden of proof on it, but more so we should be focusing on like, okay, why are we giving this person authority? What about like we should be thinking of ways to create relations where there doesn't need to be this authority in the first place.
Right.
Like there shouldn't have, like, instead of sort of being like, okay, I guess you have special knowledge, but like, how come you have that and we don't have that?
Right. Yeah.
So stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it's very, I think, I don't know if reductionist is the right word, but it's overly simplistic. Like it sounds nice. It's like in sort of intuitive. Like it has a nice intuitive logic to it, where like, oh, we're going to force authorities to have to apply themselves to a burden of proof, but that's sort of predisposing that like they're gonna play by some like the same rules or whatever. And also like, okay, well, what if they justify themselves along however you can rationalize it, but it's still, also another thing is the use of the term hierarchy is contentious.
Right.
Like why would we want to justify a relation that sustains itself in perpetuity?
Right, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier.
So that's another problem that I think people immediately picked up on, is like, okay, you can say in certain situations someone will lead, but in none of that implies that we need to create a fixed position
Right.
to where they can sustain that leadership after that event. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the other problem is that when he uses this as a definition of anarchism, and he does pretty much every time he's asked what anarchism is, it basically turns anarchism into a truism. So anarchism is just when you're skeptical of authority. While everyone says that they're skeptical of authority, in the post-French Revolution world, most people are going to take skepticism of authority as a banal truism, essentially. So it's basically stripping anarchism of its content when it's defined
Every
that way.
radical political ideology can say that it's skeptical of authority.
Right.
Even the most sinister, like fascism, will make a
I
claim
mean,
that it's,
even
skeptical of authority while also, supporting its
yeah,
own.
yeah. Even centrist liberals will claim that they're skeptical of authority. It's not, we're not living in feudal Europe anymore, or at least we're not living in the early 16th century. Anyway.
Life, it'll have to have norms that people accept. We hope accept not only voluntarily but with understanding and commitment. So the idea that you shouldn't be that if, say, you send your kid to school, you should be confident that there's no kid in the class that's spreading polio. I think that's important. That's a fair kind of decision that should be made, and I think we can find them in many other places. But the crucial point is that a justification is always needed. The burden of proof is always on those who call for some form of authority by some over others.
I have a question that isn't on my little list that is perhaps a distraction, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I actually have a 16-year-old son who has a phobic reaction to needles, and we've taken him to get the vaccine 3 times now, and every time he's unable to get the vaccine. Do you think
a phobic reaction?
Yeah, like he'll fall to the floor and writhe around. It's
for any vaccine or for this one?
No, all of them. Like we've been trying to get him vaccinated on a dozen
vaccines like polio, measles, and so on, the standard ones.
Yeah, when he was younger, he got vaccinated. But then as he got to be around 12, 13, he developed his phobia.
So the issue is the needle.
Yeah, the issue is the needle. But my question is, should someone like my kid who has this phobic reaction and who actually would like to have the vaccine, and maybe with his consent we could do this, but let's say that he is not willing to do this, be made to stay home from school, or do you think that would be a proper use of authority? Or the other option is to put him under and give him the vaccine. Yeah, which he might just knock him unconscious.
Pause it for a moment.
You could go to school and
when he said put him under, being thought he meant to
same.
I was like,
I thought that too.
What?
I was like, whoa.
Put him under, whoa. That's a bit drastic, don't we think?
Yeah, damn. All right, you won't get the vaccine, so time to die.
So the idea that there will always be norms and facilitating positive norms is could broadly agree with, but there always needs to be a sense of sort of being skeptical about it. Like I can generally agree with the idea of like, oh, the burden of proof needs to be on people who make claims and stuff, but also at the same time, it has this similarity to like when a fascist shows up and they make their claims, we should battle them in like a debate or something.
Right, yeah.
But it's obvious that like there should be sort of an axiom, a preset axiom where we can just distinguish that like, no matter how nice a centralist is going to sound, they're still creating relations that even if they can be quote unquote justified, it's
right.
There needs to be other way. Like the immediate thing I thought of when it was like a phobia of needles is like, could we think of maybe making ways where we can give people vaccines without having it to be an injector or some other thing like that?
Mm-hmm.
What would your response to be to this like dilemma of giving a child a vaccine?
I don't know. I'm not a child healthcare expert. I think the first step would be trying to find some way to get the vaccine administered. with the kid being as comfortable as possible. But I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking like find a way to administer it without a needle, or if there is a needle, maybe try to talk to the kid and see what you can do as far as that goes.
I mean, so like, I had a fear of needles when I was a kid also. It wasn't as bad as that, but I mean, even really strong phobias, it kind of does you better in the long run to overcome those. So I think maybe anyway in this instance, this is something that they should work with the kid to overcome rather than just
Yeah, because you could say that like, oh, just give the kid the needle anyways, but this mentality.
Well, yeah, I mean
the mentality behind that,
that might be traumatic. So
right. So it's like, okay, like I can understand the reasoning of wanting to protect the kid, but the mentality of like, oh, just ignore the kid's problems and give him the needle replicates this attitude of sort of not facilitating any care and just sort of like, whatever, he's a kid, instead of like, well, maybe we should talk to him, figure out him, her, what, whatever, however the kid presents, talk to them like, why are you scared of needles? What's up? Or again, figure out a way in which can this be administered in a different way that's not so intrusive,
Right.
So,
yeah.
Sit separately with a mask.
Right, which is what he does. I mean, that's what they're going to be doing, right?
But I mean, you have to protect the other people. It's like somebody says, I don't want to drive on the right, or I don't want to stop at a red light. It's too dangerous for others.
All right. So, Michael, do you agree with this norm, this idea that every act of authority really should require justification? And do you think that Noam, the way that Noam focused on it, left some centrally important implications out? Would you want to expand on it?
Well, it's not so much that it left something out that had to be addressed. It's just that there are other things to be addressed. So if you have a norm like that and you apply it to the problem of thinking about the way society should operate, you probably don't think.
I'm not sure. So thinking about it, I'm not sure who I'm more likely to disagree with. Fucking Michael Albert or Noam Chomsky.
I think it's not so much who you more so disagree with, it's disagreeing for different reasons. If that makes sense. Like Chomsky is more broad and Albert is more specific in that Albert has this like more specific participatory economics where Chomsky will sort of gesture to syndicalism and stuff, but at the end of the day he'll talk about why you should vote for like X-Democrat.
Right, yeah.
But Albert is like, we need complex job complexes. We need consumer councils to check over with the production councils who will then check.
I think you're right. I think it's like Chomsky will vaguely allude to some of this stuff I like, but then he'll garble it and then not even pay attention to it half the time. And then like Michael Albert will just make these extremely specific proposals that suck.
Right. And Chomsky's talked about how we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do super specific things because there's going to be X amount of factors. And that's a broad truism you can find yourself agreeing with. But I mean, outside of that,
I mean, that wouldn't be my first response to parecon. I'm willing to agree to deal with it as it presents itself. But yeah, I mean, you're probably right.
I wouldn't think that you continuously are having debates about whether or not something is warranted. Instead, you want to set up institutions in such a way that they sort of respect that norm, but you don't have to continually question everything, debate everything, come to some resolution about everything. It's a little like the norm is to say that people should be free up to the extent that it encroaches the freedom of others. That's another kind of a norm. I don't think any of these norms are perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect norm. There are always going to be exceptions. The one that I like is to say that people should have a say in decisions to the extent possible in proportion to the degree that they're affected by them. But if I'm making a decision that affects others greatly, then they are excluded from having a say in proportion to the degree that they're affected. And so what Noam is raising becomes relevant. The reason why the justification is required in every one of those examples is because the potential behavior on the part of one person is encroaching upon others and maybe even killing them. And so obviously they're dramatically affected. Now, none of these norms by themselves are institutions. None of them are a set of social relations that are abiding the norm, that are respecting the norm, that are actually fulfilling the norm. And so that step is still there to be taken when we agree on these things. If we agree that people should have solidarity, okay, what's the difference between an institution that produces?
I mean, so again, that's another nice truism you can throw at somebody, but even having more participational say in like a centralist republic or a company doesn't necessarily mean that like
Right.
it's going to fix the relations involved.
Right.
I mean, every certain interpersonal relationship is going to have some sort of different degree of participation, and also whether or not there should even be participation in X thing to begin with, in the sense of like, why should there be participation in a centralist institution when we shouldn't even have that to begin with? Like, just because we can participate in it doesn't lessen the degree to which it replicates the inequalities between itself in relation to everyone else. Like, what's the point of voting for the next king when, again, it's a monarchy? Like, okay, cool, but like, it's still a monarchy.
Right. Yeah.
Solidarity and one that crushes it. What's the difference between an institution that only generates legitimate authority and one that generates illegitimate authority all the time? And what institutions have those effects? So I agree with Noam's sentiment, and have for 50 years. But on top of it, I've felt the need to talk more specifically about structures to fulfill those kinds of values.
Noam, in various places in Michael's book, he acknowledges early anarchists and council communists for both what he calls self-management, and more instructively, I think, for his views on class hierarchy, and particularly on the place of what he calls a coordinator class. Do you think he's right about the lineage there?
Well, first of all, they're not the same. The council communists were left Marxists, people like Paul Maddock, anti-Bolshevik Marxists, left critical of, they regarded Bolshevism as basically state capitalism, and anti-Marxist as they understood it. And they were concerned primarily with management of production. So the council communists were basically came out of the Spartacist movement in Germany, which was crushed by social democratic force. Anarchists are all over the place. It depends which ones you're talking about. So Bakunin, for example, criticized Marx for imposing the rule of what Michael calls the coordinator class. Bakunin called it the state bureaucracy, but extends more broadly in Michael's terminology and concepts. So I think it's fair to relate it to tendencies like Bakunin's, although he was not a very systematic thinker. You can pick this out, you can pick that out.
I don't agree with that.
But I don't, by and large, anarchism is a very broad brush. You can find a lot of things in it.
The only time Being thinks of Bakunin, it's about that meme about the collective warehouse. I don't know if you've ever heard that meme.
I haven't.
So people have described anarcho-collectivism as there is a warehouse in the town, and that's where you get everything. So like, there's the collective warehouse. Go get your, and you grab whatever, and then you put it back when you're done, type thing.
I'm literally in a D&D campaign right now where that's like there's like a revolutionary militia, and like that's how they like allocate stuff.
That's interesting. Oh, they did the Bakunin warehouse? Nice.
Yeah, pretty much. But anarcho-collectivism, don't get me started on, because it's another fucking meme. But
I'm not sure how relevant in regards to like whether or not there actually is an anarcho warehouse in Bakunin's theory. I've just heard people use it to describe his theory.
There isn't. I don't know why people. I mean, so there's this guy named James Guame who was like a protege of Bakunin, and he talks about like a communal store, but he didn't mean like a literal warehouse.
Yeah, I don't know.
Exists in the center of town, and then you go get stuff. Like, yeah, I don't know. Bread tubers are dumb.
For example, if you take a look at the anarchist revolution in Spain, it took many different forms. A lot of it was a peasant revolution. So it was getting rid of landlords, getting rid of church authorities, getting the government out of our hair. But how particular villages were organized, you really have to look. They vary. A lot of it was.
So was getting rid of the church waiting for them to justify themselves, or was it just immediately getting rid of them?
Yeah,
I maybe being is taking it a bit too literally, but it's like if a justification cannot reach a rationalized, it is what it is. But
yeah,
I don't know. It just feels so simplistic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think you're being unfair.
variable, but of course it came out of 50 years of struggle in education. It didn't just show up. So anarchism is too broad a brush to be able to say council communism was pretty well defined, left Marxist, production oriented. Workers take control of production by direct participation in every aspect of management and decision making.
Can I ask you a question about council communism, again off the script? When you look at I mean, I agree with you completely with the council communism problematic that the Soviet Union was state capitalist.
Someone asked in the chat, is it true that some collectivists were also communists?
So Bakunin's collectivism, as far as I see it, was proto-communism. Guame was a little bit different. He had some kind of weird market proposals. So yeah, I mean, it was all collectivism was anarchists breaking away from the Proudhonian idea of petty proprietors controlling their own production. So, people control their own means of production, breaking away from that and advocating the socialized control of production, collective control of production. That's all it was.
Somebody asked, what's the difference between the collectivist and the communist?
I kind of just said that.
Okay, never mind. I didn't know if it was necessarily an answer to that or not, but yeah. Okay.
I mean, I could get a little bit more explicit, I guess. So, like I said, collectivist is just moving away from the idea of individual producers controlling their own production towards collective control of production. And that laid the basis for anarchist communism. Anarchist communism is kind of more specific in that it advocates collective control of production and specifically production to meet social needs.
Right, and the narco police and jails. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Non-compete Legos.
Yeah. Lego and narco cops. Yeah.
Oh, Trident came in here.
Hello, Trident.
What's up, Trident? Okay.
Ultimately,
hello.
While we're watching, if you have anything you'd like to say, you can just tell me to pause the video.
Yeah.
But when you look at Russia at that time, it would have been difficult for
Could
workers
you
to take
mute yourself when you're not talking,
much.
Trident, if that's okay?
Yeah, there's a little bit of background noise.
When there wasn't much of a developed working class in the country. And I think the project, the way the Bolsheviks thought of it was, we get rid of the aristocracy, we get rid of the Tsar, we develop a capitalist state. And then when Germany has its revolution, we continue on and develop socialism.
That wasn't how they thought of it.
In the Soviet Union. That's when we start to be able to, but we can't have worker control until we have a working class, was sort of the idea. And of course that failed because Germany didn't have its revolution. And even if it had, who knows what would have happened. But do you think that the Bolsheviks were aiming at state capitalism with the aim of, like what I said, to then move to socialism, or was it more nefarious than that?
I think if you asked Lenin and
a common interpretation from Marxists in regards to Hitler's rise to power was that was a response from the bourgeois to subvert a socialist revolution in Germany. I don't know if that's what Land is kind of touching on a little bit in regards to how there wasn't a revolution in Germany.
So there's this. So the Russian Revolution was part of what you might call a red wave from 1917 to 1923. So you had something called the German Revolution, 1918 to 1919, I believe. And also there were, I think they're called the Red Years in Italy, with big workers' control strike movement in Italy. And then there was the Hungarian Revolution in 1919. I believe it was actually 1918 to 1919 also. and there was a Bavarian Soviet Republic, all that stuff.
Oh, right, the Council Republic that was set up for a
Yeah,
little bit.
so the German Revolution is the biggest example of that always gets brought up, and so the counterfactual is, well, what if the red, what if the red wave actually did what the Bolsheviks expected it to do and created revolution across the European continent?
Right.
And so, in what sense then would the Bolsheviks be in a better position?
So, a Hearts of Iron 4 mod, got it.
Yeah.
Trotsky, what do you want to get to ultimately? They'd say a communist.
Oh, someone
communist
asked in chat, how would participatory economics work under a degenerated worker state?
Who asked that? Who asked
It was AVE Humanity. AVE Humanity.
Of course it was. I will.
Gotcha.
In fact, Engels came pretty close to saying that in debates with anarchists. He said, yes, we agree on the end means. On the other hand, the means that you carry out do have an effect on the ends that you achieve, and even on your
I don't know what Engels what he's referring to when he says Engels says that.
own way of
Well, it's Engels, so who cares?
aside from
I mean, yeah.
that, I think it's a little too fast to say that there was no proletariat. There was an industrial proletariat. It was not very different from the peasant society. It was a worker in St. Petersburg would go back to his village, let's say. But even the peasant society.
Yo, Chomsky with the historical accuracy. Let's go.
Yo.
Many radical participatory characteristics. And Marx himself, towards the end of his life, had gotten very interested in Russian peasant society. The Narodniks had done extensive, detailed work studying the peasant society, and Marx used their works and was rather impressed with it, and was even toying with the idea that there might be peasant-based revolutions. These are his correspondence with Vasulich, that the urban Marxists, the major Marxists, mostly suppressed for a long time.
Whoa, Chomsky is like spitting straight facts right now. I'm surprised.
Nice.
And if you take a look at what was happening on the ground in 1917, the revolutionary year, it was pretty complex. Actually, the first serious study of this just came out about a year or two ago, Christopher Reed's book, which is actually the first one to do detailed study, not just of what leaders and intellectuals were saying to one another, but what was actually happening on the ground. And I think it shows that
there have been other books that have done that.
Radical initiatives were coming basically from the people, not from the leadership. The leadership was trying to shape and control them in accord with their own goals and ideals. It's hard to, they were, even just dismantling the Bolshevik dismantling of the social revolutionaries and the Constituent Assembly undermined a large part of the popular base for revolution.
No, it didn't. Nobody cared about the Constituent Assembly. I mean, the suppression of the SRs to some extent, probably, but nobody cared about the Constituent Assembly.
They wanted to take control. What their goals were, you could debate, but there is a relation between means and ends. If you dismantle the factory councils because you have some ultimate communist ideal in mind, you're eliminating the basis for achieving it. So it's I don't think it's a simple story. I mean, they were also under attack very soon. Raises big problems. You can raise questions about how Trotsky, with the Red Army, crushed the anarchist movement in the Ukraine, for example. Was that a legitimate act? I don't think so.
R.I.P. Free Territories.
Uprising.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of detailed questions to raise, but I think asking what they might have had in their mind as an ultimate ideal is not really a very useful approach to the analysis of what was happening.
Well, I would say that the reason to ask it is not to evaluate their moral character, but to ask whether or not exactly what you said, the means that were used undermined the project, and
so
to what
this is
extent.
In regards to like prefigurative politics, like means and ends, is I think
basically
the point of this. Right?
Yeah,
is necessary for socialism. You pointed to a radical participatory economics sort of existing or being developed in the peasant classes. So it may be that people who are Marxists who believe that industrialization and or like getting to capitalism as a step towards socialism is necessary are wrong on that front. And so it's worthwhile to not morally blame Lenin as a authoritarian monster, but to also pick apart the assumptions and that might have been developed by the means that were deployed. But I'm going to stop this tangent now. and go back to Michael. Michael, what does what you have both been saying so far, and ignoring the bit about the Soviet Union, mean to you for thinking about the label of socialism and about the various experiences that have called themselves socialist? And maybe you don't have to ignore the bit about the Soviet Union.
Probably can't with that question.
Right.
Well, first of all, the word, I guess it connotes at an emotional level and maybe at a philosophical level, I think, a degree of what Noam was talking about much earlier, people having control over their own lives, people being in a position to determine their pursuits, people having the circumstances and the material means comparable to other people and so on. But the trouble is that those values or aspirations are not the same as a particular set of institutions which can.
Albert has a good radio voice, I think.
Someone said in the private chat here that it was Trident. Participatory economics is imagined strictly under a post-capitalist and preferably an anarchist structure, but it doesn't ignore the power dynamics and job complexes.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that?
I mean, as I understand balanced job complexes, basically the idea is to reduce the hierarchy and inequality in the division of labor. I just don't think it does it, really. I don't think it does what it's set out to do.
Still markets, right? And then like,
well, they call the distribution system income, and so you get income based on the effort that you put into production.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's stupid in my opinion.
Was there some sort of profit motive involved in all that?
Not necessarily.
Not
It's basically
necessarily.
if you put in effort, you get rewarded on that basis.
Okay. It's been a while since
you get some minimum income.
Right.
And then that income goes up based on the effort that you put in. Yeah, it's not. I don't like it very much.
A meritocracy. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, let's go.
Socialism, narco-meritocracy.
Meritocratic socialism.
Can or might not fulfill them. So, the word socialism has been used for, say, the Soviet Union, to give an example. The Soviet Union or the Soviet elites used the word socialism to capture the quality of goodness that was associated with the word and the quality of meeting the needs of the people that was associated with the word. It's not that different than people in the West using words like freedom and democracy, meaning by democracy real participation. So they're using words that have a cachet, but they don't have much connection to the actual aspirations of the leaders. And I think that was true of socialism in the Soviet Union. I think they got pretty much what they aimed for. They got pretty much what the means that they adopted were consistent with, what the level of analysis that they had and the components of the analysis were consistent with, meaning there wasn't that much attention on the political side to the influence of authority and hierarchy and the way it manifests and spreads throughout society and curtails options. And on the economic side, there wasn't that much attention to what I would want to call a class between labor and capital, a class I call the coordinator class. Some people call it the PMC. Call it what you will, it doesn't matter. It's a group of people whose circumstances are empowering, whose work is empowering, whose conditions and whose acts lead them to have a degree of confidence and a degree of knowledge and a degree of skill and connection to others, which are all commensurate to being decision makers. And another set of people, more like 80%, who are doing work that is opposite to that. That is disempowering, that leaves one less aware of the circumstances of the economy, less confident, less connected to others, and so on. And so you get out with the old boss, in with the new boss.
There is something to be said for how authority will twist certain terminology in regards to how a lot of people in like liberal republics, how a lot of representatives will talk about like how much democracy is such a value when there's a clear disconnect between what the general populace wants or needs and what has been proposed. And of course, this is, goes in with like manufactured consent, but yeah, there's definitely something to be said for like the ideology that's presented and then the actual material conditions that the authorities create that are kind of in contradiction to that. So like the USSR its goal was to create a free association and all that, but none of what it did got it anywhere closer to that in any respect.
Yeah, so my red flags went up when he said they got what they aimed for, because I don't actually think that's true. He qualified later and said, well, they got what they aim for in the context of their level of analysis and all this. I don't think they got what they aimed for. I think actually the opposite is true. I think they pursued a political strategy, which they adopted to meet or to achieve the opposite ends, but that political strategy led them into a cul-de-sac. So I actually think it's completely mistaken to say, well, they got what they aimed for. I mean,
Sure.
you know, I mean, yeah, that's just, I just don't agree with that analysis, I guess. I don't want to get into a giant fucking rant about my analysis of Soviet history, but
I guess what
So I
Albert
would-
is trying to say is that, like, authoritarians did the authoritarianism, so they got what they aimed for. I think that's the
Right.
general point of what he's saying.
yeah, I guess.
What Bing's trying to say is that, like, there was a clear disconnect between means and ends. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with what you said. Yeah.
Say one version of socialism is what I would call a coordinator class economy. Now, the state might be more or less democratic, more or less authoritarian, more or less dictatorial, but just talking about the economy, that's one version, one thing that's called socialism, except nowadays it's called 20th century socialism. It's no longer just called socialism by most people, and they have in mind those models. Another use of the word socialism doesn't have anything to do with the one thing that was taken as a bedrock of socialism, which was an end to private ownership. It's rather more social democracy. It's more about having a working class that's more powerful and that introduces into capitalism various policies that benefit the vast population. And that's called social democracy. And some people call it socialism. Bernie Sanders calls it socialism. He says, I'm a democratic socialist. Another version of socialism would be the thing that is in the book No Bosses, which is called participatory economics or participatory socialism, or I suppose you could just call it socialism if you don't mind that it'll confuse everybody. And that tries to be an economic model or
Somebody
an economic vision with some
said,
key elements and characteristics.
why does Michael Albert look like a ripoff of Richard Wolff?
You should have said he looks like a Richard, the love child of Richard Wolff and Gorbachev.
True.
It's not a big blueprint, but key features whose key features are essential to have the kind of self-management, the kind of requirement of justification for authority, but also to have equitable distribution of resources and circumstances, and also to have solidarity, and also to have, and so it has a set of institutions that are different from 20th century socialism, different from social democracy, different from capitalism, and they either do or don't do a much better job of delivering the kind of life that we would aspire to.
I mean, so social democracy is more liberal as opposed to, say, like Marxist-Leninism, which is more illiberal, in that Marxist-Leninism has like a unitary one-party situation as opposed to social democracy, which coexists with like other parties.
Mm-hmm.
But this wouldn't really make it any more socialist. More so, it's better at recuperating and sort of making liberalism seem more amicable, seem more generous to the poorer, when it's just like benign reformism. It's not really socialism any more than, say, like what Stalin did.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, in my opinion, the only difference between social democracy and Stalinism or Marxism-Leninism was with Marxism-Leninism, the Communist Party could just take state power through an insurrection and hold that. Whereas, in social democracy, the socialist parties had to involve themselves in a revolving electoral door. That's basically the difference, in my opinion.
Right, yeah.
May I interject over here? So, like, one thing I dislike about like what Albert is doing over here is he's not really talking about capital accumulation at all, and it's like whenever we like talk about socialism, many of these philosophers or writers, they just dodge this question that as being suggested or like pointed out, that many of these people, they have different definitions of authority and like very different like ontological or epistemological views, or like biases on how should they view authority. And regardless of like all of these things, the thing is value accumulation shouldn't be there in socialism, communism, or anarchism. And what Albert does is like he had into like he's like the primary advocate for parecon, but like there are other versions of parecon, and like there's one version which is suggested by Agamben, which is called panarchy, which is like which actually focuses on like there is no power vacuum and no power accumulation in that power vacuum, so that the distribution of goods isn't dictated by a singular entity in a local region. So it's actually just very weird, like um, the way they try to dodge that, like, and justify their own perception of what is socialism, but they are not at the same time they're not really clear about it. So it feels very disingenuous.
Yeah, I think what you're running into there is the kind of age-old problem with socialist analysis, in that when socialists try to identify the problem with capitalism, they get it wrong. And so they're solving for the wrong problem when they come up with their alternative visions for socialism. So in Albert's case, I think the mistake he makes is he thinks that the problem with capitalism is that a group of people, regardless of the effort they put in, get to monopolize all of the empowering circumstances and roles. Okay. And so the way that you solve the problem, the way that you get rid of capitalism, the way that you have socialism is you create institutions of participatory democracy, where the empowering roles are based on people's merits, or people's contribution or effort, and where the empowering roles are more distributed more widely. They're distributed more widely. And so as a result of that, he's not thinking about, like you say, capital accumulation. And so really he's just reconfiguring the institution, the specific institutional arrangements of capitalist society. And he's not really getting beyond what makes capitalism capitalism.
Yeah,
I mean, there's
a version. Yeah, go ahead.
That's the problem. That's also been the problem historically with orthodox Marxism. They thought the problem with capitalism was wage labor and profit. Okay, not necessarily capital accumulation itself. So they essentially created, their approach was, well, we just need to have the workers, the dictatorship of the proletariat, take over the productive structure that capitalism has created, because that's already socialized to some degree. And then we'll just eliminate the anarchy of the market and profit and wage labor. And the result of that is that you get a socialism that relies on the same productive edifice as capitalism. And so
they called it socialist accumulation, and it's like I mean, the idea was okay, like it was good, but the thing is, like they did also butcher a lot of ripe leftist political powers when Lenin took power, and it's like the problem with dirigism is like especially in the transitionary process, it doesn't really give back the power to the community, or like the workers or people at all. It gives an illusion of a representative power, but it doesn't really give back that power or to like make decisions. Like there's a version, like I was watching Albert's lecture on anarchist economics,
Mhm.
and he presents a very different kind of perspective on his parecon, on his version of parecon, where he talks about like the thing with parecon is like to tackle role hierarchy. He knows that there will be role hierarchy, so and like roles don't really need hierarchy to function. It just depends on the job that you're doing in your production process,
Right.
or if it's distribution. Yeah. So like to basically counter those like job complexes, balanced job complexes,
Mhm.
what they do is like there's a concept called remuneration, which is
Yep.
good. Like in like it is good, but the thing which he forgets to mention is the communication framework. Like
Right.
in anarchism, the communication framework is like extremely fluid, and like no one person, like of course, doesn't dictate the other's narrative. They don't really assume the other's narrative, especially in the production process or distribution process. So he forgets, he actually, he whenever he talks about distribution, he actually dodges the way distribution would work, and how the transportation from region A to region B would work. He dodges
Right.
that a lot, even if he is like given like 10 hours worth of lectures. I've like watched all of them, but he only talks about production and role complexes, and like interpersonal, like it's a very myopic view of way like presenting anarchist, economics. It's really weird, and
Right.
because of this, like the other anarchist economics, like the other versions get sidelined. Yeah, yeah. Go
Right.
ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna play the video.
Control over our lives and equity and solidarity that we would desire to. And so that, the word can be used in those various different ways. And it does confuse things. Nowadays, there are polls which show that young people are more critical of capitalism than of socialism. In reverse, they're more positive about socialism than about capitalism. That's quite remarkable. I mean, that's an incredible result. No matter what they mean by the word socialism, it's, I think, a very positive result. But it is
All
true that
right,
most of the people taking
pause.
that poll then ask.
Yeah.
So there is something to be said about how new generations are starting to positively perceive socialism. The issue, however, is when you ask these people to define socialism. So public figures like Bernie Sanders or say Vosh have taken to recuperating the image of socialism as simply just like participatory or cooperative capitalism,
Right.
where what would be identified as like social capitalism, where you make capitalist socialist in the sense of like you just do redistributive efforts to redistribute capital and money, but you keep the engine going and the world system going at the same time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
a lot of this, like these sort of populist energies around socialism from the youth, a lot of it is consolidated around these conceptions of socialism. So I
Right.
think and some of these people are breaking from that and actually going to like a stateless socialism, which is nice, but the majority of people aren't. And I think this will facilitate, or being hypothesizes, this will facilitate an age in which, if these reforms are ever achieved and America does become, or the United States of America becomes social democratic, people will then think it's now become socialist and no longer care to fight capitalism because they've become convinced that they
Right.
now live under socialism.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how it
accurate.
worked historically. So under both Marxism, Leninism, and social democracy, what the elite said was, okay, well, we know that you're not getting social change very quickly and very widely. We know that maybe things aren't changing the way that you thought they would at the speed they thought you thought they would. But you just need to be patient because eventually we'll get there. It's just a hard and long road. So, be patient. and trust that we're on the right path, and in exchange for that, we'll give you some concessions, full employment, social spending, etc. And so they basically kind of convinced people that although change hadn't come, that it was coming down the road, and they just need to be patient. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't even think that social democracy. I mean, I think I've had this conversation with you. I don't think social democracy is ever going to come back, but on the hypothesis that it did, yeah.
Well, sure, right. I'm just saying, even if it doesn't, it's still putting this. It's still just sort of recreating
I agree.
what Bean has called what has called this broad trend of making capitalism cooperative participatory in the sense of socializing capitalism, so being called social capitalism. And that's what this whole trend really is. Just like, and a lot of the people who talk about this will talk about how, like, during the FDR and LBJ administrations and between, they talk about like New Dealers and how they made, and how like the system was better because there was more of a social consciousness around capitalism. And a lot of these people talk about reawakening that, or kind of palingeneticizing it to make it come back.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word. So where it's like, hey, let's just do New Deal again, and that will solve all the problems.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to me to be like the appeal of Bernie and democratic socialism, quote unquote, in the US. That's essentially what Corbyn was doing. I mean, all of that is essentially just, okay, let's go back to the post-war compromise. And it hasn't been successful because that's not going to be successful. That's just a losing strategy. I mean, regardless of whether you want to go back to regardless of whether it's desirable to go back to the post-war compromise, you're not getting back there. It's just not happening. That's why Corbyn lost. That's why Bernie lost both times. So
people have noticed the emergence or reemergence of populism in regards to electoralism, and at the other end, the other side that has found, probably in your opinion, more success are what are called illiberal Democrats, or authoritarians who work within the technicalities of constitutionalism. And they have now found more success within their own movement of putting in restrictive policies and reversing a lot of reforms, and sort of sparking up this like reactionary energy around things. Like you see this in like Russia is a huge example, Hungary is another example, Poland. And people were fearing or are fearing the concept of this sort of mass deliberalization of places like the US as well, because that's essentially what Trump was trying to do. Like, I wouldn't consider Trump a fascist. The worst he can be is an illiberal Democrat, in the sense of sort of abusing the Constitution he's under to sort of deliberalize it. And this camp seems to have gotten far more successes, and from your hypothesis that it's no longer becoming viable to even have reforms, it sounds like there will just only be more successes from the illiberal Democrat side than from the social Democrat or whatever ML states and parties are still around today.
Right.
It's like I would call it participatory social democracy with American characteristics. I mean, I don't really think America's constitution would largely change, especially considering like how much they like protect corporations, and I don't even think that their financial networks, which are like inherently neoliberal, would give up their need, or like they need to rely on third world countries or like other countries for their resources.
Oh yeah. I mean, so Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah. I think I also told you, being that I actually don't even think the liberal Democrats are having much success anymore. Their time in the sun, so my hypothesis is that the liberal Democrats, or the kind of electoral conservatism of like Trump and Bolsonaro and so forth, whatever you want to call it, I think so. Their time in the sun seems to be over. Like it seems to have been from 2016 to like 2019, 2018, and now, like, I think they may be able to pull out more victories in the future. Trump also didn't get reelected. That was a big blow for that. But I think they may be able to pull out some victories in the future. But they're going to be really fleeting, like they were last time. And so I think they're going to be in something of a revolving door of power, but they're going to be constantly thrown in and out. I don't think they're going to have lasting success.
Right, and I mean,
I think the way the illiberalism will come, the main way, is just going to be that states, regardless of who's in power, are going to get more draconian because they have to be in a crisis period.
Okay, so like the illiberalism will not necessarily come from electoralism, but it'll become from sort of a natural progression of the decay of capitalism.
Yeah.
So that would still agree with the hypothesis that that we're moving towards a more illiberal age, but it would go against the idea that it's necessarily through electoralism, and it's more so fundamental to the system itself, which I can agree with. And yeah, I mean, people. Reactionism has gotten a lot of like media attention, and to the effects of how effective that is, I know Orban has gotten a lot of pressures put on him, and if those work in the sense of disincentivizing his regime and others, then that will sort of work as a way of like getting rid of those electorally. The same way, in the sense that like fascism is just not electorally viable, or it's not viable even in the sense of like taking state power anymore. Like it had its own little day in the sun for like 20 years or so, and then so yeah.
Okay, what's socialism? Would probably have a pretty hard time, describing what they're for. And many of them nowadays would probably say, well, it's it's sort of what Bernie's talking about. And that's fine, because that is a big step forward, but it isn't a new economy that's fundamentally different than. Just one little comment for a moment, based on the discussion, that preceded this. I don't think the Soviet Union was state capitalism. I think it's very misleading to decide in your head that there are two things. There's socialism, meaning an end to private ownership, a desirable society, and there's capitalism. This rules out the possibility that there's an economy that isn't capitalism, that doesn't have capitalists, that doesn't have private ownership, that is fundamentally less than what we want. And I would call that coordinatorism, an economy that's still class divided.
Yeah, that's just fallacious. So designating the Soviet Union as state capitalist does not entail that you reject the idea that, or does not entail affirming that the only possible social systems are capitalism and socialism. That's just simply not. That is nothing. Well, those two propositions have nothing to do with each other. So that's just nonsense.
Depending on how you define state capitalism, it also ignores the idea that there could be multiple different incarnations and different variations in regards to what is considered state capitalist.
Right.
So if you were more broad with the definition, you could consider every economy in some sense state capitalist, because it uses some sort of it uses some mechanism where the state directs markets in some favorability way, which we would call a form of Derringism, as opposed to a more immediate like control. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know what Albert's doing here. I mean, I guess it also, the feudalism, I guess, that wasn't capitalism. But I mean,
pretty much every theorist of state capitalism was aware that feudalism was a thing, so he's just talking nonsense.
Right.
But
no one wants to go back. Well, unless you're Moldbug, but
he doesn't even want to go to feudalism. He wants to go he wants like feudalism, capitalism.
Yeah,
hybrid,
he wants
like,
what is called like joint stock.
Yeah,
feudalism.
Stonks. Feudal stonks.
Yeah.
Have you, Piper? Have you read Hilferding's take on state capitalism? Like, he
The
had written a short
Totalitarian State Society.
state. Yeah, he called it totalitarian state economy.
Yeah.
So, on your take on that?
Yeah, I've read that. It's stupid. It's kind of, it's funny because like the whole totalitarian thing I think is nonsense. I think it was Cold War theory that tried to portray societies like the Soviet Union as having this monolithic state structure that terrorized the population and controlled everything, to the point where it was actually completely impossible for there to be a society like that. I mean, no state structure is monolithic. It always responds to the ebb and flow of social forces. There's always a bureaucracy, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's funny that it reaches its height of ridiculousness in Hilferding, who's a Marxist, and not like, an anti-communist or bourgeois theorist, right? So he takes it to such a level where just everything is under Stalin's personal control. And so it's not capitalism because it's the totalitarian mechanisms have eliminated all the basis for capitalism. And it's not, it's not socialism. It's basically Stalin's personal fiefdom in every single way imaginable. And that's just completely ridiculous. I mean, anybody who studies the history even a little bit sees that there are like waves of social forces that create chain reactions that Stalin wasn't able to predict, that no one was able to predict. Stalin's rule itself was the result of those chain reactions. So the idea that the whole thing was just his personal fiefdom, I mean, it's just stupid.
Well, yeah, I mean totalitarianism is usually applied. Sorry, Dryden.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the term is usually applied to specifically two leaders, Hitler and Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is something to be said for the totalistic nature that these leaders wanted their people to perceive, but that is very disconnected from, say, the material structure. Like, no matter how much, say, Hitler wanted to be in control of everything, he still needed soldiers. He still needed a propaganda minister. He still needed X amount of generals, and all of these different people had their own different ideas about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to be said for, say, Hitler's personal oath, where he wanted everyone to sort of make himself ideologically irreplaceable in the eyes of everybody, and I would argue that's totalitarian in a sense. But you are right in the sense that when we could look at like material structure, that's impossible in the sense of having one person who can do everything without the need of someone else, unless we moved into the realm of speculation in regards to like AI and stuff like that.
Right.
I mean, he does mention one thing in the essay that calling it capitalism, state capitalism, would be because capitalism primarily needs markets, and there were no markets. There were only like pseudo markets in US.
Yeah, I remember that.
The economy never really relied on markets. The entire, I think his usage of totalitarian might be in relation to the accumulation of power for the state, in the way their property relations were like planned out. by Lenin and which Stalin built upon. So yeah.
Well, I mean, he's specifically talking about the Stalin period. I don't remember him even talking about the Lenin period, but
Oh, that's my addition. I'm just talking about the economy which was set up by
right.
Lenin. I don't think the economy which Lenin left after he died. I don't think Stalin did anything to change it at all. I just think I think like.
Well, that's not true. Like the NEP was
Mhm,
so Stalin.
mhm,
So what Stalin did was he ended the NEP, and he did the collectivization of
mhm,
agriculture, and he created
mhm.
the 5-year plans. So that like completely changed the entire economic edifice. I mean, I would agree with you in the sense that the social system didn't change, but the political economy definitely did.
It got more concentrated. I think it got more concentrated towards state power, I guess.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
say it
Okay.
that way.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, so in regards to the markets thing, it's interesting to me the way some Marxists will attach themselves to essentially like the mainstream narrative of like the command economy, where like all the market mechanisms are abolished and just the bureaucrats decide what goes where. Um, I mean, that's just kind of laughable. Um,
Yeah, I mean it's antithetical to like what Marx wrote in Das Kapital. Marx
right.
literally said that there should be no hierarchy in high stage communism. It's
Right.
kind
Well,
of
but
just
even
weird
just
the
keeping it
way.
on the terrain of describing the Soviet Union, a lot of Marxists will say that the Soviet Union was not capitalist for the same reason that mainstream economists would say it's not capitalist. Well, they had a command
Yeah,
economy. They
yeah.
got rid of the market and replaced it with central planning, quote unquote. I mean, it's just wrong.
And I mean I'll
Because
add
I
one
mean,
thing. The way, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, so uh, again, it's kind of the problem of looking at the social system as a national mode of production rather than looking at the world system. So they're treating the Soviet political economy as something to itself that's not enmeshed in a wider structure or set of structures, um, system, and it was enmeshed in a wider system. The so-called command economy, what that really was the socialist bloc, the Soviet Union, the PRC, whatever example. They partly insulated themselves from the world market to gain a competitive advantage while still participating in the world market. And so it was very similar to the way that mercantilism was carried out in the 17th century, right? So there's no
Yeah.
getting rid of market mechanisms. The entire thing was geared toward market mechanisms. So
I mean, I'll add one thing. The way they treat, like most economists or like in general, the discourse around markets and states, it's like and central planning, is like most of them treat having markets in an economy being like diametrically opposed to state or like central planning.
right,
And I, it's like markets need a centralized entity to like regulate, like implemented wherever like markets have been implemented. Of course, there is no true free market capitalism. It always needs some external
right,
body to like regulate it. So it will need a state then. Like if there's a body, if there's a government which is like separated from the means of production and has control over the market, it literally is a state if the power is like centralized into one single entity. So
right.
I generally don't like the way like most Marxists I would generally just call them Marxist-Leninists, who are
Right.
like Marxist-Leninists, um, like leaning or sympathizing Marxists or economists who
Right.
treated that like, yeah, it's just weird. Yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
it makes sense from an ideological point of view, especially when we talk about like people who want to push right-wing libertarianism. If you want to increase privatization and stuff like that, then you should frame it as opposed to statism, right? Like
Right.
this
Yeah.
is we want to
Yeah,
conceptualize these terms within a framework and categorization that will reinforce the authority. So the way in which we comprehend these things reinforce whatever. So like when it comes to the Soviet Union, they need to sort of have people get on board with the idea that their system is not capitalism, and so they need to define capitalism in a way
Right.
opposite from what they're doing. Same thing
Right.
goes for right libertarians and saying no, 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 no. See, neoliberalism or ANCAPism is not statist or is against statism because it's going to have like everything's going to be privatized, and the only reason that markets don't work now is because of state intervention, even though historically speaking markets have always needed state intervention and always had to rely, as Trident just pointed out, has always had to rely on the
Right.
backing of a central body. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna try to get going on this video.
in which 20%
yeah,
is still
go ahead.
dominating 80%. But there's no capitalists. There's no private owners.
I hold with the Forrest Johnson or Johnson Forrest interpretation of state capitalism, which doesn't have capitalism defined the way you define it. It's primarily about the private ownership of the means of production, but more about the basically the production of commodities for sale in the market is a primary way, a mode of production, primary way of distributing goods. And that a way which necessitates there being a propertyless working class that has nothing to sell but their labor, because you have to exploit labor time in order to create the value that then is exchanged in the market and so on. Based on Marx's Capital and his analysis of capitalism.
If you have nobody who has private ownership, then everybody is a worker.
Right. Well,
then there's no
What? There wasn't private ownership under
What the
feudalism,
fuck?
but everybody wasn't a worker. What are you talking about?
Well, yeah. I don't
Why did he just
understand.
call everyone a worker? This is so weird. Is Albert like trying to signal that there was, just because there was labor aristocracy, that's why everyone was a worker?
So that seems to imply that state ownership makes it to where everyone is like, that seems to confer with the idea of like a worker state existing. Like, oh, if everything's state owned, then it's worker owned.
Yeah, this is very weird logic.
It's
Very
weird.
weird argument.
Yeah.
class division and there's no class rule.
Well,
I might
you
not
could have-
like it, but that's what you're saying.
Well,
Wait, what? Does he think there was? Wait, is he even talking about the same thing right now? Because he doesn't think that the Soviet Union was a classless society. He says there was a coordinator class. So, like, what is he even talking about?
you could have
Okay, so
you could have public ownership
okay. Like
for the state.
I think you already know like what is a coordinator class under his like definition.
Mm-hmm.
So like according to Albert, coordinator class is the class which is like a class collaborationist. Is like the roles which generally act as class collaborationists, like managers,
Right.
bosses,
Yeah.
and he labels them as a like a collaborative class, is in the sense that to basically like reduce their power collectively, such that the social class, which is like generally we like uh, roles which need more labor power, sorry, numerical, like more laborers, more workforce, they generally are like below the hierarchy, and then there's bosses who dictate their work conditions, the nature of their work, and like the conditions of production. So to reduce that, Albert says that we have to label them as this class, and then we have to like reduce their narrative power over the other workers.
Right.
So this is how he looks at it. Yeah. Yes.
With elected representatives as a coordinator class, and also have everyone else in the culture can be considered a worker. but there were stratifications between the workers based
Okay.
on competition between sectors. I mean, and they're all. But let me put that aside because I want to ask Noam a question. He's been, he should talk some. He's important to be here. But we can pick this up in another podcast, Michael. I want to ask about social democracy and Bernie Sanders movement, and I'll throw in support for the Squad and AOC and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and ask the question: can we use those means to get to the kind of participatory economic that we desire, to get towards the socialism that Michael's been talking about, or are we at risk in the same way that Lenin was of trying to use authoritarian means that undermine our ability to develop a socialism that we say that we want?
Who's that directed to?
That's directed to you. Yeah.
Oh, to me.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with what Michael said about Bernie Sanders. I think it's very desirable to move in the direction that he's describing, but it's mild social democracy, very mild. In fact, one of the associate editors of the world's major business journal, London Financial Times, Rana Farrokhar, she sort of quipped in a discussion that if Bernie Sanders was in Germany, he could be running on the Christian Democrat program, the right-wing program, which is actually pretty well true. Take a look at his main demands: universal health care, free higher education. It's all over the place. It's in Germany, Mexico, Finland. These are normal things in most societies. The United States is very retrograde in this respect. So I think it makes sense to bring the United States into the civilized world. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a study by the main monitor of these things, Commonwealth Fund, a comparison of health systems around the world. They do it regularly. Of the richest countries, top, I think, 11 rich countries, the United States is last in just about every aspect of healthcare. It's the richest country in the world. Extraordinary advantages that no one else has to bring the United States into the civilized world with things like universal healthcare, free higher education, adequate daycare, so that women can work without having double jobs of taking care of home and work. All of those things are very desirable. It's quite unlike the situation with the Bolsheviks, who took over the society and by compulsion ran it forcefully in a direction that they wanted. That's not what moving to mild social democracy is. Just improving people's lives to the point where they can then be in a position to think seriously about deeper.
Okay, so under the Bolsheviks, you have a state that forces people to comply. Under social democracy, you also have a state that forces people to comply. What is the supposed difference? Like,
you get to elect for a different party. You get to
oh, awesome!
vote for a
I
different
forgot
party.
about
That's
that.
the difference. Yeah, you get to elect a different party. Yeah,
awesome.
So you did see. There's more.
So does that mean that
So therefore,
the Soviet Union would have been like way better if like I got to choose if if it was like a multi-party democracy?
Yeah. So like if there was Bolshevik Party A and Bolshevik Party B, and you had to choose between either or, it would have made the USSR more democratic then.
Okay. I get it.
For questions like, in our society, it's taken for granted that if you're a young person, the best thing you can imagine is to have a job. You go back to the early industrial revolution, 19th century. Workers regarded having a job as a fundamental infringement on their elementary human rights. It means throughout your waking life, most of it, you're subordinated to someone else's orders. What's so great about that? In fact, for 2,000 years, back to the Romans, this was regarded as an intolerable infringement on basic human rights. The idea that having a job, meaning following somebody's orders for most of your waking life, the idea that that's a wonderful thing, I think that not only can be questioned, but I think questioning it is right below the surface. As soon as the question arises, people understand, yes, that's an exigency of life in this society, but we don't want it. So,
but you'd have to have land and do subsistence farming, or have another alternative than spending money in the market to really have that position, right? I mean, for you to feel like that's an infringement on you rather than an absolute necessity for survival, you have to have the context of a way of life where you can sustain yourself, and they did in Rome.
What? Does Doug Lane know how like working class movements form? Like, does he think nobody questioned wage labor, like if they didn't live on the land? Like, what the fuck is he talking about?
I bet he has never spent a day with workers at all. And
Like, I thought this guy was supposed to be like
it's
an
weird.
epic Marxist theorist. I don't know why he's saying like, oh well, the reason
He's
they
a
questioned
Marxist?
wage labor, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
My
Zero Books
goodness,
is
what the
like,
fuck?
yeah.
yeah. I don't know why he's saying the reason they questioned wage labor is because, like, you know, they worked the land most of the times. They had alternatives. Doug, what the fuck are you talking about?
And they did hundreds of years ago, and even not that long ago in the United States, there was a lot more subsistence farming going on. But if you have a worker who has to get a wage to buy his food in the market, then of course he's going to want that job.
I don't think that's, take the late 19th century. The United States did have a incipient working class. The working class was, they didn't regard themselves as radical, but they were strongly opposed to having to be in a position where they have to take orders from others. The Knights of Labor, the main labor movement, its slogan was, those who work in the mills should own them and run.
Okay, right.
And, about the farmers, it wasn't subsistence farming. The farmers were organized. They wanted to form what they called a cooperative commonwealth. They wanted to get rid of the northeastern bankers and who, you know, provided the credit to buy crops and then controlled them by debt to arrange the marketing. They want to do it themselves, cooperatively. The real populist movement, not what's called populism today, but the populist movement of the 19th century was aiming towards, in fact, what they called a cooperative commonwealth, where farmers would work together in the common good, set up their own systems of planning, distributing crops, sending them to the general society, arranging for the financing, but in a cooperative manner. So I think it was, and in fact, the Knights of Labor and the populist movement were becoming pretty close to combining. It was blocked by violence. It's a very violent society. Labor history in the United States is unusually violent as compared with other similar societies. And it was pretty much crushed by state and private force working together, you know, Pinkertons and National Guards and so on. But it came pretty close to moving towards a kind of cooperative commonwealth in which the industrial enterprises would be owned and run by the working class, and they would be working in coordination with organized farmer groups, which was, of course, the great mass of the society. And this was very widespread. I mean, the populist movement began in Texas and moved up to Kansas and Oklahoma. It's all over the Midwest. It's a really large part, the dominant part of the society.
So no, hold on a second. So I want to go back to the question I asked at the outset, because it didn't get answered, which was, do you think that when we are trying to achieve the kind of participatory economic system that Michael describes in his book, and that the working class wanted to create, as you described in the past, that we can do it by supporting the kind of social democratic movements? That is that a step towards socialism, or do we risk making a similar mistake to the kind that Lenin made? No, that was the question that I didn't hear you address it.
I don't think the comparison to Lenin holds. This Sanders-style social democracy is a good thing to pursue because it benefits people's lives. It brings the United States more or less into the civilized world. Okay, that's a desideratum in itself. I think secondarily, satisfying basic material needs in a decent way so that people don't have to be terrified of maybe getting a disease and, you know, having to throw out their meager life savings to try to deal with it. People get over that hump. Yes, then they can be in a position to work seriously on these deeper questions, which I think are not far below the surface. I think they come out very quickly, but you can't if you're in a situation of extreme privation. I mean, we're in a country where the majority of the population, maybe 70%, says they're trying to survive from paycheck to paycheck. If you're in the gig economy, it's not even that. You're up to see if the boss tells you you're going to have to work 15 hours tomorrow, and then you don't get a job within a couple of days. I mean, in that kind of society of precarious living, and I mean, this is the only country in the world where you have a phenomenon like deaths of despair. I mean, that's a serious matter. It's mostly white working class people who are so despairing, they're just killing themselves, having an increase in mortality. Well, if Sanders-style social democracy can get you beyond that stage, it's a good thing, and it's a basis for working for something further, the kind of thing that Michael's talking about. Incidentally, when I talk about the 19th century, I don't mean to suggest that they were.
I have a lot of problems with all of that, but one that I think is particularly poignant is how long a time scale does Noam think we have to work with? Like, okay, we get Bernie Sanders' social democracy in the United States, nowhere else. Not even talking about that. But okay, we get Bernie Sanders style social democracy, and then we go on to the other stuff. What is the timetable here? Like, how does this work with climate change? How does this work with all of the ongoing structural decline? Like, how is he figuring this on a timetable?
That they had ideas of the kind that Michael's developing. It was just a sense that we want to get out of the control of the landlords, the bankers, the northeastern bankers, the mill owners, and so on. We want to do things ourselves. There wasn't much developed about where you go from there.
Yeah, it's possible that somebody could hear what Noam was saying, not this time, but at the start of the last one. What's so, the idea that the epitome of, or the apex of human fulfillment is to have a job. And you might hear that as saying, which I don't think Noam was saying at all, that you want to not work. That's not the point. The point was that you want to not take orders. You want to not go into work and become a cog in a machine. You want to not participate in the economy because you're compelled to, because you're under pressure to, and with no say, et cetera, et cetera. So what it points toward is an institutional problem. How do you organize allocation? How do you organize the workplace? How do you manifest the desire of workers so that when they're working, they're fulfilling a human capacity and a human need, and they're meeting the needs of themselves and others? Then it's no longer such an onerous thing. It is, in fact, part of what it means to be a human being, and part of what it means to be fulfilled. So the trick is, or it's not a trick, the task is to conceive an economy and to organize an economy in a way that going to work, that is working to produce stuff that's going to meet human needs and develop human potentials, doesn't rob you of your humanity, but in fact enlarges and manifests your humanity. And that's what I think coming up with an economic vision is all about. How do we organize the division of labor? How do we arrange decision-making in the workplace? And how do we connect workplaces one to another and to consumers? So it's basically the kinds of questions that I think No Bosses addresses or tries to address. And we'll see the extent to which it's a successful attempt.
So I want to go to, you've written down a question that I'm going to try to paraphrase. And Michael, if you think I'm getting this question wrong in the way I paraphrase it, correct me, okay? But I see that that Noam, you and Michael have a lot of agreement about the kind of society and economy that would be desirable and that we might call socialism, or that we could call participatory economics. But I wonder, Noam, if you have questions or problems with parecon that you want to bring up or address with Michael. Are there things that still need to be developed and that would be worth developing, even as we're in a phase where the best we're going to be pushing for at the moment is a social democratic reforms to get people out of misery?
I guess the main difference that I've had with Michael over many years of close friendship and collaboration is just I'm less confident. I think we just don't know enough about human beings to know how they're going to function under different circumstances. So I think when Michael says it's a skeleton or a framework that I feel more comfortable with, I think a lot of options have to be tried. Even take markets. I mean, you can imagine ways in which markets could be used simply
Somebody
as an
in the chat said that Albert is essentially saying the hell of capitalism is not the firm, but the fact that the firm has the boss. The Bordage quote.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
literally Albert's thing. Like that's the main thing he says. Like that's the main takeaway.
Well, and it sounds like his new book is just hey, there's no bosses, so like
yeah.
And it's really weird that he's presenting a very weird kind of participatory state democracy as like anarchism. It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
Well, Chomsky's about to like do a market socialist nay right here. So
Michael disagrees, but I think that's a possibility that could be pursued without any remuneration, any consequences to it. Just here's one of the ways to find out. Get some information on how production could be organized. Or take the question of people being compensated to the extent of their participating to the extent that the decisions affect them. Well, that's a pretty fluid matter. Like suppose you happen to be affected, not personally, but morally by, say, the crushing of the population of Gaza. well, you're not directly affected by it, but you should have every
Sure.
reason for you to have a role in decisions about it. And as soon as we move into all of these areas, I think we find a fair amount of fluidity. Should there be small, family-owned, no worker businesses? I don't happen to think so, but if people want to try that as a mode of organization, I don't think it should be blocked. Not with anyone giving orders, just mom and pop store, let's say. I don't.
This is really stupid.
Okay,
So Chomsky is basically saying that, okay, well, essentially we can experiment with many different modes of production. And that's just not how that works. So you either have X mode of production or you have Y mode of production. And it's not a matter of blocking it with orders. It's just that's how modes of production work. You either have one or the other. There's not really, you can't really get markets over here, mom and pop shops over here, and communism over there. It's not really how that works. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of sophistry. In my opinion.
I have one question for both of you. Do you folks think, does a market, don't assume the economic framework, just the idea of a market. Do you think a market actually causes value accumulation?
Depends on what you mean by accumulation. A market necessarily involves value production. So markets are just the production of commodities, production of things to be exchanged, and that is value by definition. So whether or not it's accumulation, that depends on how much. That depends on how much of society markets actually govern, right? So when you get capitalism,
Yeah, I agree.
is the point where markets become the overarching organizing mechanisms of society at large. You before capitalism, you did have markets that were not the overall organizing mechanism of the society. They were marginal. So
Yeah. So I mean, there's one more thing which I'm finding weird. Like both, especially Albert, he's presenting that there will be division of labor, and that's even more cringe. That's like even more weird. That they're literally talking about anarchy, like planning anarchy, which is which is so fucking weird. There is no there there are no prescriptions or like descriptions of like social or economic roles under anarchism. It's like the person literally chooses for themselves how they want to function or like govern their own life. I don't really know. Like it's not really even dictate. Their life isn't exactly dictated by the production process as well. It's not really centralized. So
yeah,
it's weird the way
what I'll
it's
agree
weird.
with Chomsky on is, I mean, he didn't really say this, but I agree with Chomsky that parecon is blueprintist in the sense that it tries to work out such a detailed set of mechanisms for the regulation of the society that essentially just kind of loops back into managerial approaches. So, I mean, I don't think
Yeah, it's like
I honestly don't think there's much difference between ultimately a balanced job complex and the parecon proposal for the division of labor. I don't think there's much difference between that and having a boss, as you say. I mean, effectively, just
yeah.
you're the larger system would be your boss at that point.
I mean, the whole point is like the entire, even if there are no bosses, like they ignore the conditions of production which actually dictate if the society as a whole is forced to like adhere to like the idea of capital. And it's like you can literally have a proletariat class without having a bourgeoisie or a capitalist ruling class. Like it's literally what the workers quote unquote state is about. So
Right.
I mean, yeah, yeah, go ahead. I mean, that's literally what like market socialism is essentially. It is. It's weird.
Right.
I don't really
Yeah,
have
go
a
ahead.
strong feeling about it. I think there are many ways in which human society could be organized, which would contribute to the ideals that we share. So that's my main question: is just less confidence.
Michael?
Well, Doug, when you said earlier, what we could do now is fight for these social democratic gains. I think that's true, but I also think there's more than one way to fight for anything, for social democratic gains. So you can fight for, let's say, a $15 an hour minimum wage, or even a $25 an hour minimum wage, and it's an end in itself. That's what you're talking about. What you discuss is that and nothing else, etc. Or you can fight about it in a way that is attempting to prepare consciousness, organization, and desires to go further. And that's two different ways of approaching, in this particular case, the same reform. One way of approaching it tends to stop. The other way of approaching it tends to keep going. All right, so I prefer the latter way of approaching it. And then the question becomes, well, what composes the latter way of approaching it? How do you fight for a little more accountability, a little higher minimum wage, a little more, a better healthcare system, and so on and so forth, and at the same time arouse and organize and facilitate fighting for more? And I think that in order to do that, it helps a whole lot to be able to couch what you're saying in terms of longer run goals. So that's why I think vision is very important for hope, for planting the seeds of the future in the present, and for how we talk about things. The issues that Noam raised, there's probably a lot of things that we would disagree about. That doesn't matter very much, I don't think, honestly. It's the core things and whether we disagree about them. So No Bosses says, for example, private ownership of productive assets is wrong. It should not exist. It means profits and control, and there's no argument that I can see for either, for the inequitability or for the power imbalance. So I don't, I come to the conclusion that even though we
I don't know if anyone else noticed it, but Noam Chomsky is like really rapidly blinking.
That's not that much about human nature and all the vast possibilities that exist in the future.
Yeah,
I think we can rule that out. And if we do rule that out, we have to say, okay, then what is the mechanism for making decisions in a workplace? And what is the mechanism for apportioning the social product among people? We can leave it open, or we can think about it. And I think
okay. So can I say something?
We're gonna have a mechanism for apportioning the social product among people.
Why?
Wow.
Why is he so fixated on micro level things like regulating micro services and micro decisions so much? It's like he wants to control everything and not like just let it flow.
Stacks
It's like he's not even
bureaucracy.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's like Michael Albert. It's like Michael Albert is literally doing social capitalism over here. Regulated social capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, so Bing didn't put him in Bing's video because it just felt kind of redundant.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of it ends up being this whole thing of like, well, if you participate and you have all these councils and then you have it's like, oh my god, why?
I mean, so when he says what should be the mechanism for apportioning the social product, what the fuck? Like, why do we need a mechanism for that? The mechanism is people organize it how they see fit. Why do we need a mechanism for apportioning the social product? Both how and why would you need to conceptualize something like that in advance? Like, why?
I think
it's also that he also assumes workplaces would exist. He also assumes that there would be centralized workplaces, which is also weird.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Well, people still work for income. That's the thing.
Yeah.
People still work for income, which,
I don't know. Bing's like, why don't you just automate this and that, or just allow more freedom of association? Like,
no. But then people won't get remunerated for their effort.
Right, but like, it's sort of
you won't have the meritocracy that way.
what Albert is trying to envision and ultimately hyperstition is like this interlocking, just multi-layered thing of just constant bureaucracy when there are so many other different ways we could deal with these problems than this. And a lot of the ways he describes capitalism and dealing with it, and same with to some, it's I guess less of a degree to Chomsky in the sense of Chomsky's not blueprintist, as you say. But we'll still talk about like, well, you vote in Sanders, and then there you go. Same thing with Albert, where it's like,
biggest, I don't know. It like I like what Albert has to say more tactically than what in terms of tactics than I do what Chomsky has to say on tactics. But I like what Chomsky has to say. Well, within a certain confined framework, I like what Chomsky has to say on socialism more than I do like what Albert has to say on socialism. Like my problem with Chomsky is mainly like the tactics and the strategy, and my problem with Albert is mainly his idea of socialism. But I don't know.
Authoritarian kinds of principles. We come up with the idea that the people who do the work should be making the decisions over the productive workplace, but the people who consume and who occupy the society, for instance, the pollution, also have a say. That's a tall order, right? To convey to the producers, to the workers, to the people who consume, and to the people who live in the communities and might smell the pollution, to convey to them all an influence over the decisions and the outcomes. That's a tall order. And if we don't think about it, it's going to be hard to arrive at it. So thinking about it, we came up with participatory planning. Thinking about how to get rid of class division, on the one hand, you come up with get rid of the element of the economy that causes a certain set of people, let's say 2%, to be owners and capitalists. Get rid of that. That's private ownership out the window of productive assets. They should be, you can say they're collectively owned and owned by nobody. You basically are making a plea to borrow a factory, to use a factory for what end? To benefit society. But anyway, if we say we want to get rid of that because we want to get rid of that ruling class element, that owning class, then I'm stuck saying basically, well, we have to get rid of the thing that elevates 20% also. We want classlessness. We don't want 20% over 80%. And if that thing is that the 20% is more empowered, is more connected, is more knowledgeable, is more confident, then we have to ask what produces that. Oh, so it's partly school and upbringing and things outside the economy, but it's partly the kind of work that we do. It's partly that some people do empowering work and some people do disempowering work. And so I want to get rid of that. There's numerous reasons to get rid of it, but the main one in my eyes is to achieve classlessness. So, these are what Noam referred to as scaffold, which is what I like to call it, partly at his not insistence, but, with his provocation. I think it's wrong to do a blueprint of a future society for the reason Noam gives. We don't know enough. There's another reason. It's not our right? It's not our right to decide for future people.
So why are you doing it?
People will ask me how
yeah, wait, what?
I don't know.
Why?
People
What?
in the future are gonna...
Like you're doing the thing without being aware that you're doing the thing. Like it's literally two sides of your mouth right now.
Being was like,
I like the way
Albert
he's
is saying
ignoring.
this. What?
Yeah.
Decide how long they want to work, not me. But the responsibility that we do have, I think, is to think through the structures that are sort of necessary, essential. The few structures which, if we don't have them, we're going to have class division. We're going to have inequity. We're going to have, the conflict of people against people. That's the opposite of solidarity. And those are the structures that No Bosses addresses. And that's motivation, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I want to ask one final question. We're coming up towards an hour, and I don't want to keep Noam Chomsky too long here. And thank you again for participating, Noam, and Michael too. But what I want to ask you both is, and I'll start with you, Noam, is this: you've both been on the left for quite a while, struggling for socialism for quite a while. You've seen a lot. I want to talk or ask you specifically about the '60s movement, which I think in many people's imaginations was the last time there was a real feeling of revolution on the left. You know, things like what happened in Paris in '68, and even in the United States, there were many people who were on the left who thought that they were pushing forward a revolutionary struggle, and that a revolutionary struggle, sometimes for socialism, sometimes for something ill-defined. But would you say that at that time you were more optimistic about the kind of something like parecon developing than you would be now, or have we lost sight of the need for a radical transformation on the left? Is my question. I'll ask that of you first, Noam.
First of all, I think we shouldn't exaggerate what was happening in the 60s. There were things that were really, in fact, the most extreme, serious case that I can think of, not just tossing around slogans, was actually what Mike did. What Mike happened to be doing as a student was more far-reaching than, in terms of institutional change, than anything else I can think of. Remember that the 60s are a time when the head of SDS, Paul Potter, when he was president of SDS, the most important left group among young people, gave an address in which he said, we have to have the courage to name the system. He couldn't use the word, it was too scary. But we've got to find it. We've got to get ourselves advanced enough so we can at least name the system we're opposing. Actually, if you look at his speech, he couldn't utter the word. To say the word capitalism was too scary. That's where we were on the stage of moving to a revolution. Okay, I think we're way beyond that now. A lot has happened, not just in the 60s, but in the aftermath. A good deal of the activism and organizing that has really had a major effect was the consequence of the 60s. So take, say, the feminist movement. The 60s was barely beginning, just barely beginning. Hints and bits and pieces of it there. Took off in the 70s. Environmental movement didn't exist. Ideas about workers' control were in small groups of people who were thinking about history. There was nothing like the extensive, deeply thought out proposals of like parecon. It was not there. Nobody was talking about it. I never thought that Paris was a serious move towards any revolutionary change. The basis of it wasn't there. The mass of the population wasn't engaged in saying, yes, this is the direction we want to go. It was fluff on the surface. Same in the United States. When SDS broke up around 1970, just look where it went. One direction was to Maoists who were handing out the little red book at the GE factory to workers who just wanted to beat them up and know what they were talking about. The other was weathermen who said, let's go down Main Street and smash up the windows and something will happen. I mean, it wasn't a revolutionary situation. I think it's much closer to that today. And I think actually activism is probably greater today than it was then. Then it was narrowly focused. Let's get the troops out of Vietnam. Let's have free speech on campus. Now it's much broader. And I think many more people are involved at one or another level.
Michael?
Yeah, I would concur with almost all of that. And so I won't repeat it. Instead, there's the possibility of confusing uprising and anger. And there was plenty of that in the 60s, to be sure. And coordinated, insightful, aware desire for a new world. We would chant, we want the world and we want it now, but we didn't have any idea what the hell that meant. And I think I would agree that the current situation, it's not as tumultuous in some ways. And the culture doesn't have the component that existed then, which was very important. It's called hippie culture. It was a rejection of many
so
things.
I like to point
wasn't
one
an
thing out.
affirmation of a new system.
Michael Albert doesn't like feminism.
Really? Why?
He thinks it's woke.
Oh my God.
That's why he. So like the word, like the tone when he mentioned the word hippie, like there's like a 7 or like a 8-minute lecture where he like talks about wokeism, and like unironically any person who uses the word wokeism in a negative manner is like it's like a conservative, a dog whistle. It's very weird.
Yeah.
He's like Bob Black.
Yeah. I didn't mean to know that, but yeah, it's the whole political correctness thing.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Society, but it was a rejection of certain ways of living and acting that was widespread then, and that was made it easy to organize. We didn't have to organize among the population. We could have the counterculture organize among the population, and then we could organize among the counterculture. It's a lot easier to do that than what's done now. But what's done now is, I think, arguably Noam's right about that, closer to reaching or trying to reach the population, trying to reach it with positive aspirations. When you ask, are you more hopeful now than then? Well, you'd also have to ask, are you more sane now than then? So, for instance, a lot of our hopefulness then was naive. And it was a function of the upheaval that was visible in many places. But it wasn't a function of underlying commitments. Now, the absence of some of that upheaval causes people to be less hopeful. But in many ways, this is a paradise for organizers, right? I mean, it ought to be possible to organize in huge constituencies now. It may be that
What
the
is
biggest
he
obstacle
talking
to
about?
success now isn't in fact.
What'd you say?
He's what is he talking about, like regarding organization? Like, is he forgetting like the 1960s to 1980s was like the peak of like organization? Why would people organize if there is no incentive to organize? It's so weird. Like, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I could go on a whole tangent about
He's talking
this.
about that upheaval. He cannot even like mention, just call it the situationist movement, or like the postmodernist movement, or like the post-structuralist movement. No, he will not use that word. He will not use feminism. He has like a hate boner for these terms. I don't know why. It's referring to them as upheavals is very weird. And
I don't know. I could
okay, yeah.
I could go on a huge like spiel about what I think both of them got wrong about 1968 in particular. I don't want to do that, but
I mean,
yeah.
like Noam is generally in like historically I've seen like he has always been in support of like whatever has happened since the 1960s. He's never really like disliked it, but of course he did dislike the reactionary elements, which I think I guess he's a product of his time.
Repression isn't in fact the effectiveness of the other side, but it's that our side hasn't quite understood yet how to reach out, how to involve people in a way that keeps them committed enough so that you can have sustained efforts at both the reforms you were talking about earlier and the bigger changes. And so I think I would agree. On the other hand, it's hard to be. I think your audience would probably think we're crazy unless we acknowledge that it's hard to be optimistic about things when the danger of pandemic, the danger of possible nuclear war, the danger of climate change are so pronounced. I'll throw in something that is a little. I'm curious, Noam, how you'd react to this. Obviously, the climate situation is incredible. However you describe it, whether you describe it as literally an existential threat to humanity's existence, or you describe it as a threat to humanity having civilization, whatever you describe it as, it is a humongous danger. And to my eyes, it's hard to imagine, maybe not impossible, but less probable than I would hope for, that in the next 10 or 15 years, the left is going to be, the humane, concerned, aware, political left is going to be strong enough to win the desired changes if all of capital is opposed to those changes. So the irony here is that I find myself hoping, however weird it is, that a significant portion of the corporate elite of the capitalist class comes to realize and to be willing to act on the fact that they're going to suffer too, that their world also is going to be demolished by ecological effects unless they take action. So that the left's task is going to be, with them aware of that and trying to make changes around that. And without that, I'm not sure we can succeed. But with that, our task becomes to prevent their changes from being so authoritarian and so centralist and so derogatory toward most sectors of society that it doesn't lead any further, trying to make sure that it's more equitable and get it to lean further. And when I use the word authoritarian there, I'm worried that there may be no way around that regarding climate change. So, for example, Noam, if Bernie became president, hell, if you became president, the task of doing multiple Manhattan projects, way larger than the Manhattan Project, to ward off climate disaster and ecological nightmare is probably going to.
There is a Hearts of Iron 4 mod in which you can make Chomsky president of the United States.
Well.
Whoa. Nice. I mean,
involved a certain amount.
Yeah, if Chomsky ever became president of the United States, he'd get assassinated. Not by like.
I don't think an assassin has to worry. He's already 90 something. So
no, I'm not talking about now. I'm saying if he ever did. And I don't mean by the United States government. I mean like some like right winger would probably assassinate him.
I think mostly a Zionist would.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like some fucking like I don't know, some like neocon would like fucking blow his head off.
I mean, I think Bernie also got voted out because of that, I think the party, like like they might have like foreseen that if Bernie had won this election against Trump, so Bernie would have like cut US support to Israel, and I think Biden was like was the better choice for them to have good relations with Israel, since Biden is so pro-Israel. So,
And okay.
And the left is just going to have to guard against all that. But arguing as if we are going to transform society into a participatory society in 10 years, and then a participatory society will revamp, the direction of production so that the ecology will not be destroyed, that's not likely. And so, regrettably, the fate of the planet may depend on.
These guys keep saying stupid shit that I could go on gigantic spiels about, but I don't really want to.
Ruling class elements finding
what did he say?
a modicum of sanity.
I don't know, this idea that, movements aren't going to be able to stop climate change. Social change isn't going to be able to stop climate change. So, we'll probably need to get the corporate elite to make some conservative solutions to the problem. I mean, it's just
this is like capitalist apologia.
Yeah, I mean,
capitalist
it's just
apologia.
just like fuck off. Like, seriously.
It's also talking about a fear of like ecological authoritarianism too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's true, but I'm not sure it's that much of a contradiction. So let's take concrete examples. Take, say, the fossil fuel industry, coal industry. The owners, the bankers who fund them, they're not going to do anything. I mean, they may say some nice words and then move on to greenwashing. Their interest is to maximize profit and power in the short term. But what about the workforce? Actually, there have been steps in that direction, interesting ones, like in West Virginia, coal country, which actually has a history of working class organization and activism. There are now significant moves among the mine workers, even the mine workers union, to face up to the fact that coal is going, but you can have better jobs and better lives by working together to move towards sustainable energy. So we, the mine workers, will get together, take over these collapsing industries, devote ourselves to tapping mines, to being trained for, supported for solar energy, wind energy, other sustainable forms. That's going to take a national commitment. Actually, in capital terms, it's minuscule, but it does take funds for sustaining people in a transition, for training, for setting up the basis for alternatives. But that can be done, and it can be done. And I think it actually came pretty close in other cases. Take the housing financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Well, the way it was handled at the government level was to bail out the perpetrators and kick everyone else in the face. That's Obama, basically, and that laid the basis for what finally became Trump. But there were alternatives, and if there had been a powerful enough popular movement, it might have moved that way.
Yeah.
Obama took over the government took over the auto industry, basically, essentially nationalized it. Well, what they did is give it back to the owners and have them produce, Humvees. What they could have done, and with enough popular pressure, could have been compelled to do, is hand it over to the workforce and develop what the society needs, like mass public transportation. I don't think it was very far from that. What was missing was the popular activism, which could have pushed it that way. And I think the same is true in things like fossil fuels and other parts of the economy.
I don't disagree with you that it's possible. I just, I hope that can happen. I talk to people. I mean, I just finished spending a long time talking to a labor organizer in Pennsylvania, and we talked about two things that bear upon what you're describing. I think the first was
weird flex,
the extent
but
to which
okay.
Take Amazon's response to the organizing in Alabama, and I expressed to him that I thought that Amazon's response was basically sort of the threat of a good example argument in a labor situation, that they realized that the whole thing is a pile of cards, and that if Amazon workers really started to get organized and really started to see the possibility of that, who knows what you could have. You could have a massive strike at Amazon in which workers were basically sitting down and making huge demands. And the other one was Western Pennsylvania, and his assertion that the possibility of garnering support in Pennsylvania talking about fracking was impossible. And I said, well, what if the formulation was that nobody loses their income that those jobs disappear, those companies disappear, but nobody loses their income. Everybody is retrained in order to be able to work at, ecologically sound and also humanly sound jobs. And he said, yeah, but a lot of people are 50 or 45 or 55 and they don't want to start over. I said, fine, those people get an income and don't start over. They get early retirement. And you're right, the money isn't the issue. The issue is that once these kinds of steps are taken, it's a slippery slope towards something dramatically different for society. Call it participatory socialism, call it whatever you want. And the other side understands that. And that's why the other side fights so hard, like in the plant in Alabama. So the relative absence of effective left organization able to organize, it isn't a question. What you're saying is if the organization is there and if the activism gets strong and if the demands are made, the effect can happen. I agree with you. It's the first step that I'm not so sure can happen quickly.
But we're not in disagreement about that. It leads to the same conclusion. Our activism should be directed towards making that first step happen.
Exactly. I agree. But he asked how optimistic are you? And I think that first step will be a little easier with Sanders in office than with Biden in office. And it would also be a little easier if there was a sector.
That's not going to happen. Sorry. Like, that's done.
Uh-oh.
That's over.
Oops. Yeah.
Fucking roll those credits. Okay. Sorry.
Bum 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 bum.
Yeah, mate.
This was very weird. Yeah. I feel like laughing.
So, I mean, it's interesting when they talked about like eco-authoritarianism because a lot of people are sort of saying that the climate disaster is accelerating the popularity of, say, groups like eco-fascist and similar, and there's going to be this sort of rise in that. Although there is something to be said for the climate refugees and how the displacement of people and people having to leave their home and go to other countries and how that has fueled reactionary and fascist rhetoric. I don't think that Bing doesn't think that like the result is like that there'll be some sort of like successful eco-fascist revolution that'll take over. I think what we'll see is a lesser sort of like ecological reactionism possibly spring, so but
well, so one of the big problems I had with what Albert was saying was that there are going to be moves by the elite to deal with the climate crisis, but they're not going to be desirable from our perspective at the very least. They're going to be moves for creating a future which is sustainable, but possibly even more conservative and or possibly even more rigid and exploitative than our present, right? So the idea that, well, maybe, we can get them to make some of these changes. I mean, there's going to be a significant portion of them, maybe even all of them, they're going to eventually look to do that. But when they do that, it's not going to be anything that anyone but the elite and those who they've managed to make their useful idiots actually want. So,
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, the major takeaway from my end will be like the way Albert like tried to present division of labor, and like he literally supports division of labor while talking about balanced job complexes. And then having centralized workplaces, and then wanting to like not restructure the economic framework entirely, and like just implement some kind of regulatory social capitalism. It's like the regulating those microservices, or like the roles, like the task. It's like regulating minor tasks a role has to achieve. A role is supposed to achieve.
right.
And yeah, and and another thing is like whenever people like talk about environmental change, they don't. I mean, Michael Albert was talking like a literal classist over here. Like, yeah, we don't care about like like movements don't cause social change. Like these people, they regularly uh, do not take into account ecological functions. Like what being said was like regarding what eco-fascist quote unquote revolution. I think many right-wing libertarians, they may like present some aspects or like facets or like behaviors which may represent eco-fascism, but I don't really think like people would take eco-fascists that seriously. Like they're
No,
just
yeah,
like a
that's
very
what Bean was
ostracized one.
saying. That like, because people are
Yeah.
saying there's going to be like this mass insurgence and then ecofascism is going to take hold and state power, but Bean is saying that's not what's
Mhm.
going to happen. At most, you'll see some sort of like
Mhm.
reactionary or conservative movement maybe take on ecological matters in their own way. Like that's probably the most extent of what you'll see. But in terms of having some sort of eco-fascist takeover, no. Like I don't think that's going to be seen in the
I mean, there
foreseeable.
Yeah,
can be like a
it's not going to
ecological
be
ecological
eco.
hegemony can be there.
It's not
I
eco.
think, yeah,
It's not eco. So I don't. It's not going to be eco-fascists, and it's probably not even going to be in the main conservative social movements. Um, Again, it's going to be the elites moving towards options that are ecologically sustainable, but are perhaps even more hierarchical and exploitative than our current setup.
Some sort of technocratic machination, basically.
Well, no, not even. I mean,
yeah,
you could be talking about like neo feudalism in the sense of everything's just parcelized into realms of traditional power. But there's not the same accumulation dynamics that lead to environmental degradation. Um, so I mean, this is why I thought it was really dumb again when Albert says, "Well, maybe we can get the corporate elite on our side to some degree." Well, no, what that looks like is they're going to create something ecologically sustainable, but possibly worse than what we have now. And that's assuming that they're successful in that and that they don't bungle it, and that you know, uh, as a result of that, the human race isn't,
yeah,
its existence isn't threatened. But you know,
yeah, I agree. I mean, in the chat, like Christopher Gibbs mentions Michael seems to just welcome the Leviathan. I mean, yeah, he does. It's I would say like the anarchist siding with the Bolsheviks would be like the accurate. I don't know, like the goals back then. Like all of them used to call themselves revolutionists for a while. Like when Berkman used to talk about that. But of course, like when Lenin took over power, so they felt betrayed and all. But I think it's more like uh, people call like the recent trend on Twitter. It's like socialists who have the American flag. So I think it's more like that, like the Leviathan example. But yeah, I get the point.
The term, what Christopher said, the term climate leviathan's a pretty good term, actually.
Yeah, actually,
uh,
yeah, true.
for this sort of emergence of absolutism in the face of climate disaster, sure. And yeah, I think how Piper is seeing it in regards to an emergence of possible neo-feudalism being the manifestation of that. Yeah, that's probably Bean would say that's more likely than some sort of like 20th century-esque vision of how things will play out, in which the fascism will take over and then all the good
right?
socialists will defeat it and
Yeah,
whatever.
right.
Which
Yeah,
is a very like 20th, like it's so disconnected from
It's like a
how
fantasy.
things have
Yeah,
evolved and how authoritarians have evolved to sort of adjust to certain
yeah,
changes. Like the
right.
ones in power right now have had most of them understand that they can't get rid of constitutionalism or certain technicalities, that they have to live with those.
Right.
And so like
I generally see it as like a group of like a class trying to like sustain ecological hegemony onto
Right.
the working class.
Mm.
Like they just develop some kind of like hereditary um, hereditary dictatorship based on like ecological functions, like deifying ecology itself. Thank you. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know, but I think of course like they may be technocrats as well, like their implementation.
Yeah.
The work of the ruling class who was complaining about, and I think this is starting to happen, was complaining about the fact that they too are going to be up the creek without a paddle if things aren't done soon. Those two effects will help that grassroots organizing tremendously.
Well, we can do something about the first part, not the second part. Actually,
No, the second part, that's the irony. Yeah.
Second part, I wouldn't. It's not that a large part of the reason why you're getting the rhetoric about being socially responsible.
Just buy off the opposition. I get it. Yeah.
Popular pressure.
Yeah.
What they call reputational risk. So Bank of America has to agree to stop financing fossil fuels because too many people are just going to pull out.
Right.
So you can do things there too. And I think the things that are happening with the mine workers in the union are suggestive. It can come right from the working class.
Yeah, those are
revival of the labor movement, which is critical.
Incredibly exemplary. I agree.
I want to know how optimistic I am. Not very much, but possibilities are there, and we have to pursue them. On that,
I don't think we disagree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming onto the channel. This will be going up tonight. And Noam Chomsky, this is the third time you've been on the Zero Books channel. I bet you had no idea. But thank you both for coming.
I bet you had no idea. Chomsky just smiles.
Yeah.
So
that was fun. It was about it. I mean, honestly, that met my expectations. Yeah. I mean, that is about what I was expecting.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Trident. I don't know why you got kicked out.
No. It was like my Wi-Fi died for some reason.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Do you want to take like, questions or anything like that, or?
I mean, if people want to ask questions, that's fine.
Yeah.
Pedro, when you say Chomsky's second worst discussion, is the first worst his debate with Foucault? Top 3 terrible Chomsky discussion.
I mean,
that was pretty much exactly what I expected, to be honest. Which is why I wanted to watch it on stream instead of just watching it alone. Because
it's like when you read one Chomsky book and then you realize the other ones kind of repeat the same general points, but then just updated for like newer years or whatever. And so like this whole interview with Chomsky was nothing new, where Chomsky just resaid all of the things he has been saying for the last 60 or so years. So
yeah.
I mean, it's literally just like they both said their shit. Like they both said their like they said the lines. They said their like they made their pet points.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it. There's nothing very interesting in any of it.
I mean, in my opinion, it was a bunch of sockdams talking to each other about and like posing and like laughing as I won't say laughing like I think they generally believe in like the whatever they believe in. But the Marxist guy, I don't remember his name. What was his name?
Doug Lane.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like he thinks wage labor like will exist under Marxism. It's weird. It's so weird.
Yeah,
I mean,
the thing that the thing that Doug Lane, 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 the thing that Doug L the one thing that's needed, I agree with Pedro. We should have definitely this just needed Richard Wolff to round the whole thing out, I think.
Yeah.
But there's actually, I was watching another interview. I was watching another interview with the lady who does the Bad Faith podcast that Chomsky argued with those Bernistas about Biden. I was watching her interview Richard Wolff and fucking Chris Hedges, and that was pretty fucking brutal.
Nice.
This is actually way better than that interview. Like way more enjoyable to watch. Yeah, I mean, yeah. But yeah, this is all about what I expected.
Do you want to watch the new non-compete video as well, or no?
I mean, do you want to do that?
If you are
Yeah,
okay
no
with
problem.
it, we could put it on and also talk about it, but it's up to you. I'm not sure how you're going to use this later. So
yeah.
We can,
Brianna
we can
Joy
eventually,
Gray,
like,
is that her name? I don't know her name. What were we gonna say, Trident?
oh, I was just saying, like, we can eventually, like, I guess in the future, if we can watch some of Albert's lectures and then, like, try to critique it. I would like,
I don't really want to
your
watch
views.
Albert lectures right now, but
No, not right now. I'm just saying in the future.
oh sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh god, his new video is about hierarchy. It's 30 minutes long? Dude, come on. Why are you making 30-minute long videos? Like, shut the fuck up.
well, think of it
Mucho
this
video.
way: if we cover that, you can take the stream and cut it into 2 videos, so you have more than 1 video.
Well, I actually won't be able to do that because this just goes up. Like, it's just gonna go up.
Okay.
So we can maybe do that another time, though.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess I'll just wrap it up for now. There's not too much more I have to say. Is there anything you guys need to want to say, or?
No. Not
Yeah. If you're new to post comprehension, check it out.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
If
I
you like
agree.
anything that being said, then you'll get more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, do
There you
check
go.
out the videos. Like, Bean's videos are really good.
Yeah. Go
Yeah.
watch post comprehensions videos.
I'm a future content creator. I might be covering economics and all.
Cool.
Mostly debunking stuff. Yeah.
Nice. Maybe then fucking people will go to you instead of this fucking unlearning economics dude.
Well, actually, unlearning economics is like he's like a proper like an anarchist. The thing is, he's an economist, so since he works in the field, he has to like explain policies in the sense that like people will actually it will actually benefit the working class. So he tries to.
I
work
don't know.
like,
I just
he's a-
remember him arguing for some really weird stuff when it came to like landlordism.
Well, he
I
also
can't be
said that
explicit about it, I don't
markets are
remember enough.
he
but-
said markets are the problem, not capitalism. He once tweeted that.
No. He has like said, like in his recent in his recent video on neoliberalism, he does indeed like just mentions like capitalism is the problem, and then its practitioners, and like especially Steven Finker. So it's like a 1 hour, 1.5 hour video. So and like you can also like he mentions a lot of stuff in Mixi in his talk with Mixi, and like
Why is
it's
Mexi
like,
still a thing?
I mean, Mixi is Mixi. I think she's cool.
Isn't she like a weird like vegan like closet ML or something? Like what the fuck?
No. She's mostly like she's like a ecological Marxist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you can cover unlearning economics sometime, Piper.
Maybe, I don't know. I haven't watched many of their videos. I just remember them saying like stuff I found weird about landlordism in a video.
Gotcha.
I mean, they're against landlords. So, I mean, I'm on their Discord, so I've spoken with them. It's only
Yeah, I mean,
regarding
I
land
wasn't.
value tax. No.
Mhm.
I'm just talking about their policies. Like
Yeah.
there are issues like especially regarding land and like wealth inequality, and like as like wealth inequality is like difficult to like measure. So what people do is like especially economists they advocate for policies which tackle wealth inequality indirectly via income inequality policies. So it's
Okay.
so that people
Okay.
I
I don't
think
know. I guess I don't know. Maybe I'll watch his videos again at some point. I don't know though. I really I barely watch left tubers, and it's just not really on my fucking radar. But maybe I'll watch
Yeah, no problem.
his videos
No
again.
problem. I mean, you can. It's up to you. I mean, he
Yeah.
criticizes breadtubers a lot. He criticizes like most of the breadtubers. But yeah, you can start with that.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
good session. Good session.
Yep. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna wrap it up now. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you later.
Thanks for inviting. Take care.
Yep.
Thanks. See ya.
Yep.
See ya.